RumbleStump.
You're listening to 1232, an audio epic, produced by RumbleStump Entertainment. Chapter 13. Karn faced Flint and placed both hands on his shoulders. Flint, wild-eyed, feverish, was shaking. The contrast between his reaction and Karn's peace was otherworldly. She looked straight up into his eyes and spoke clear and firm.
Brother John is with Sioux.
That was all she said. Flint looked at her face, holding his breath. She pushed him back into his seat, and he folded, rocking his head side to side. He was trying to get a grip. His face contorted as the sobs erupted. Karn stood by him with one hand on his shoulder. Nothing on her face but a pained look. She understood death, Rhona thought, better than any of them. But there was no bitterness in her eyes. Rhona gazed into her bowl of stew and sat very still. She stared into the murky broth, her eyes blurred, but not from tears. From a numbness that neither let her cry or grieve. Afraid that whatever she did in the next few minutes would be interpreted as heartless and unfeeling, she sat still. Little Daffod squirmed out of his seat and crawled into her lap. He tucked his head down and threw his arms around her neck.
Oh boy, what is this kid doing?
She was about to pry him off.
Don't be sad. Brother John is with my mama and papa. He's not lonely. Sioux is taking care of him.
Daffod hugged her neck for a long time, then sat back and looked at her face. Rhona couldn't avoid his eyes now. There was so much hope in his innocent face, and, yes, peace in his eyes.
I will show you. Come with me. I will show you.
He struggled down from her lap and motioned for her to follow him. Rhona, grateful to leave the scene Flint was making, feared little Daffod now.
This kid has a way of seeing right through me.
Rhona looked at Karn, who nodded permissively, but continued to stand by Flint's side. Outside, Daffod picked up a cherished stick, obvious by the childish carvings on one end, and stuck it through his belt.
I can protect you, Lady Rhona. I've got this sword. I'll show you the way to get to heaven.
The way to what?
Rhona had to jog to keep up with Daffod's running, her body rebelling against the sudden movement. Even though it was early morning and the sun was laying a golden blanket over the green, the wind chilled her. She struggled to follow him up the hill behind the hut.
I don't know what this kid is talking about, but anything could happen. That's proven. Oh, I hope it's not some really weird culty ritual thing. Who knows what's over this hill?
She slowed before they came over the rise and prepared herself for something out of the ordinary. But she sighed when she saw where they were going. Daffod marched ahead of her to a graveyard and stopped beside a rudimentary headstone that had heavily settled into the fresh soil. For a reason Rhona couldn't justify, she cried when she read the name Brother John, carved into the stone. With embarrassment, she wiped the tears with her sleeve and sniffed.
This is the door to get to heaven. Brother John is on the other side, Lady Rhona. You can't see him.
Daffod's simple explanation evoked an awkward chuckle from Rhona.
Yeah. I guess that's one way to look at it. I mean, you don't really go anywhere when you die. You just die, okay?
She was trying to explain a grown-up conclusion to a 6-year-old. It brought back memories of when she told Flint Santa wasn't real. That didn't go over so well. For a minute, she was worried she'd spilled the beans for Daffod, but he didn't take it at all like she expected. He laughed. He stood up straight and said,
That's the same tale the Enchantress told Brother John. She's a liar. Death to tyrants.
He then drew his sword and play-fought an imaginary enemy, swinging it over his head and uttering deadly challenges under his breath.
That's cute. He obviously needs to be taking something with a little more punch than Ritalin.
Rhona took one last look at the headstone. Underneath the name was a phrase she was sure she'd heard somewhere before. But it struck especially hard at that moment. It read,
For we walk by faith and not by sight.
The words shook her up. She didn't know how long she stood there, but when she raised her gaze to the land just beyond the grave, she noticed that over 20 of the graves were fresh, no grass growing on them yet. In fact, there weren't any old graves at all.
Looks like people around here are in a hurry to get to heaven.
She turned around and headed back for the hut, following the sound of Daffod's epic sword battle. Daylight seemed to shine upward from the dewy grass, reflecting the sun's golden light as pure white and silver. It looked as if the land were made of diamonds and emeralds, but for only a moment.
This makes life worth living. What a view,
she thought to herself. She let her eyes linger. Above the valley rose a mountain, high and windy and lonely. There were no clouds in the sky now, so it was a soft, cheerful blue. Rhona looked at how the forest grew to the river and followed with her eyes where it turned to tall timber. Most of the hills in the distance were covered in forest. The hills harbored Castle Brecon, Zorreale the Enchantress's stronghold. Rhona could see the fortress in the distance. She had never imagined, even in her wildest dreams, what a new castle would look like. It wasn't like the storybooks. Rhona had seen it up close. The stone still bore the scars of cutting, and the wooden walls still had the lingering smell of fresh-cut timber. Really, Castle Brecon was only a high wall with a keep. Llewellyn the Great, known for building many castles across the country, had only erected a hall and a tower of stone. Underneath was the dungeon, and all around were the newly constructed courtyard, barracks, stable, armory, and storehouses, made of heavy timber. If Rhona had known history, she would have been surprised even more by the peculiarity of the stronghold itself, but she didn't, and therefore couldn't tell that Castle Brecon was a product of more modern engineering. From a distance, however, it was a gray and brown spot amidst a sea of yellow-green grass. To her right was Brecon Town. Trees hid the road and the buildings from her view, but she saw the plumes of smoke coming from the huts below.
It's good to get the lay of the land, I always say.
Distracting herself from the death of her father, it was no use. As soon as she headed back to the hut, she saw Flint. He was striding uphill, swinging his arms.
Oh boy. No matter what I say, it's gonna be wrong.
She didn't want to set him off right now. Flint's emotions were unpredictable, and Rhona didn't want to be in the middle of them if he blew.
Where is it?
Flint demanded, not even looking at her.
The grave? It's over there.
Rhona watched him stalk by and monitored him. Flint stood over the grave, his arms stiff, held out from his sides, his fists clenched so tight that his knuckles were white. Rhona stood behind him, not knowing whether to say anything or leave him alone. She saw his shoulders fold and shake, and watched as he lost composure again. A powerful breeze swept down from the mountain, cooling Rhona's face and playing with her hair. She took a deep breath in and watched his grief. It was comforting. She couldn't bring herself to feel anything significant, other than it was such an enjoyable morning. It all seemed dreamlike. Flint in his deep despair, while she was enjoying the sunshine. The shine wore off, though, as the growing realization that her heart was too far gone shadowed her thoughts again. She looked on as Flint struggled to stay upright, sobbing deep and loud. Rhona knew she ought to feel shame right then, because it would have been just as easy to laugh as to cry. Karen approached her, looking into her eyes, with a discernment that pierced Rhona's thoughts. But Karen said nothing.
There are a lot of graves here.
Rhona shot Karen a questioning look.
Many have given their lives to defend this land from oppression, and still more may, for her power grows.
Karen looked at the graves and took a deep breath.
We have endured much suffering to keep the peace. But what good is peace without freedom? And what good is freedom without truth to guard it? This much I have learned in my life, Rhona. What is worth dying for is worth living for. Every moment of each day, no matter the sacrifice.
The Welsh woman's words touched buried chords that resounded through Rhona's core. But she didn't know why it made so much sense.
Dad, why? Why did you leave me here? All the work and struggle, all the searching, and you're gone? Dad, this isn't fair. It's not fair.
His loud sobs cutting through the morning air. Under his breath, he called out for Rhona, and she tentatively approached him.
Rhona, this is awful. Karen said Dad was executed just a few days ago.
His voice cracked, but he marshaled the strength to continue.
By a mob. He was beheaded, all because he wouldn't let them have his printing press. Oh, Rhona, can you believe it? Dad was a martyr for nothing. In the end, Karen said they took it away. He was framed. They called him a rebel, but Dad wouldn't do anything wrong. Rhona, they killed him for no reason.
He broke down again, reaching for Rhona and crying hysterically. She couldn't withdraw, so she stood close to him. Flint's grief could have melted anyone's heart, but Rhona's.
These people didn't ask for this. Dad, who knew his reasons? But he didn't ask for this. Why can't they be left alone?
Rhona thought of her own bullies, like Lewis and Kellum. Their high and mighty controlling claws reminded her of this Enchantress.
Mowing people down because they can.
She clenched her jaw. The longer she stood there, the more convinced she became that what was going on in Brecon was unjust.
People like me deserve this kind of treatment. People who steal But people like Karen, like David, or Dad, they don't deserve this.
It was a bitter moment, and the more bitter she became. She realized the futility of her own struggle and her inability to help anyone, not even her own brother. Hello, 1232 listeners. This is Callie Sioux, and I'm excited to tell you about Dramify, the ultimate platform for creators and fans of audio dramas. With oodles of genres, hundreds of shows, and thousands of episodes, Dramify is your go-to streaming service exclusively for family-friendly audio dramas. Whether you're a devoted listener or a creator of a family-friendly masterpiece, Dramify has something for you. And guess what, 1232 listeners? You can now enjoy 1232 on Dramify. Just go to dramify.com/1232. That's DRAMAFY.com/1232 and get started for free. Happy listening.
1232 is sponsored by PhilBob Borman Art, a nationally collected skyscape artist, mastering the shape and color of western skies and towering cloudscapes, inspiring viewers to look up at the glory of God all around us. PhilBob Borman is represented by Insight Gallery, Fredericksburg, Texas, Legacy Gallery, Scottsdale, Arizona, Caudry Gallery in Whitefish, Montana, and the Museum of Western Art. Contact for available paintings or commissions at PhilBobBormanFineArt.com.
This episode of 1232 is sponsored in part by Oasis Family Media and its family of companies including Oasis Audio, Enclave Publishing, and Sky Turtle Press. Publishers of the forthcoming epic Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, rendered in modern prose by Rebecca K. Reynolds and illustrated by Justin Gerard. For more information, visit fairyqueen.com. That's fairyqueen.com. Or find the link in the description below.
Let's see. Where did we leave off? Karen left them on the hill. After some time, Flint and Rhona started back to the hut together. Rhona wasn't keen on conversation, but she didn't want to kick Flint while he was down.
I just want to go home, Rhona. I wish I'd never come here, never found out about all this. It's so terrible. I miss seeing Dad alive by just days. Days! I wish I'd never heard about Black Dagger and never found out you worked for the people that got Dad killed.
Wait a minute, Flint. I had no idea about any of this either.
Rhona, you trained with them. You worked with them. That makes you the same person as Hoffman. Oh, it just makes it worse. I want to go home and forget it and leave it all.
Hoffman?
She took this passive-aggressive attack dutifully. Rhona recognized the name. Hoffman had exemplary skills and a chopper. So she was told by many people in Black Dagger, including Lewis. He was a tinker, somewhat of a genius, but suffered from mental health problems. Rhona hadn't heard too many friendly comments about the man, and how we fit into all this, she didn't know. Flint sauntered down the hill, hands thrust in his pockets in sheer defiance, in step with Rhona. He shook his head slowly.
He's the other man that came through with Dad. And you know, he's still alive. He sold Dad out. Yeah, Karen told me the whole story. Doesn't that make you feel just awful? To know that he's one of your people? I hope that doesn't make it hard for you to live with yourself.
Flint was no longer in control of his tongue. Uncensored thoughts flowed out.
You make me sick, Flint. Sick. How can you live with yourself? That's what I want to know.
Rhona was half yelling and stepped in front of him.
You act like your faith means something to you, but you don't even do it right. You think I should feel guilty for working for Black Dagger? Well,
She paused, searching for something that would get to him.
you should feel guilty for living all those years, calling yourself religious, and not even sacrificing one thing for it. Let's talk about your people and the hypocrisy they live by. That's why Dad died, because of their beliefs. Meaningless.
Flint shot her a drop-dead look. She continued.
So what am I? Your enemy? That's rich, Flint. Yeah, that's good. I thought Jesus said you were supposed to love your enemies.
She was being as sincere as she knew how to be.
Well, you've never loved me. I think I've made my point.
She swallowed hard and backed away from him.
If you want to go back home, fine. You go back to your safe little world, your shallow life with only theoretical problems to solve. But you're going without me, Flint.
Flint cast a sideways glare.
Why would you want to stay here? Rhona, you don't belong here.
He strode by her, brushing her with his shoulder.
This is where Dad died. I can't stay here. It's too sad. I can't.
He held a hand on his forehead, his voice full of defeat.
We probably can't even get back anyway. There's no way unless we can get into that room with that stone. We'll die here too.
His face twisted, but he drew in a jagged breath and stopped the tears. Rhona recognized that this was true, and that in a disgusting twist, she might need Flint's knowledge to survive here.
Why would I stay? Joke's on me if there's not even a way to go back. An option to go back doesn't help me anyway. Nothing to go back to but jail.
She reasoned. Rhona planted her feet and crossed her arms, hiding her fear of returning to the real world.
If I can't get Flint on my side, I can use him to help us get a leg up with these people. Flint knows about this world. I just gotta push him.
Her thoughts began to formulate.
Flint, listen, you're right. But we can't just waltz back into that castle and ask that crazy lady to go home. Plus, we have no idea if Lewis is waiting for us on the other side. Or he might find a way through too. Look, the way I see it, we need allies. We need help getting to Taff in that tower.
Rhona pointed towards the stronghold that held, perhaps, her only friend.
I don't like what they did to Dad any more than you do. But what better revenge than to give these bastards a taste of their own medicine? Don't you think we can be of help? We might be here for a reason.
Rhona was in disbelief from words that were coming out of her mouth. What she was saying was right, even if it was manipulation. Sure, revenge wasn't the best reason, but if Flint could see her point...
This war has nothing to do with us. You don't get it. Stuff like this happened all throughout medieval times. There's nothing you could do to change it. The only thing I'd stay for is to kill Hoffman. He betrayed Cardigan, got him captured, and then tried to kill Dad. They couldn't just leave Dad alone. Burned down his printing press and executed him right down there in the town.
Flint's posture changed when he finished speaking. Not only was it frustrating to think that they may never get home, but the thought of Hoffman getting away with what he had done to John Thatcher was maddening.
That's the spirit. If that's true, Hoffman didn't just betray Dad, Flint. He's partly responsible for getting all the people up here killed. That guy ruined life for a lot of folks.
Rhona was putting the story together now. Hoffman betrayed Cardigan to get to her dad. When that didn't work, they waited, lulling John Thatcher into safety, then caught him. But surely Hoffman was being used by the Enchantress.
She's no dummy. But what did Hoffman have against Dad that he would go that far to betray his only peer in this other world?
Rhona hoped to get answers.
Hey, psst, real quick. Let's hear a word from our awesome sponsors who make this show possible. Then, we'll get back to the episode.
Young and old adventurers alike should know the importance of preventing new injuries and healing old ones. That's why 1232 is sponsored by Alpha and Omega Chiropractic, serving Ruidoso, New Mexico and the surrounding area. Whether you're seeking treatment for a new or reoccurring pain or are interested in preventative care, they are ready to work with you towards a healthier and happier you. Visit alphaandomegachiropractic.com for more information and schedule an appointment today. That's alphaandomegachiropractic.com.
Let's see. Where did we leave off?
Aren't you scared stiff? This is madness. We can't go after these people, these barbarians.
Flint yelled at her, lashing out.
Don't you care about Dad? And what he stood for?
Rhona asked, seeing her upper hand.
What did Dad stand for? Do you even care?
Flint asked, confused.
I'll admit, I've got daddy issues. I'm not worthy of anything, and I am a jerk. But there are bigger jerks out there, Flint. Boss Kellum and Lewis come to mind. You know what? I can't change the fact that I was never close to Dad. It's too late now, and I barely knew him. He barely knew me. But I can't just leave here knowing I could have helped these people, you know? What's being done to them is wrong.
No, Rhona, it's history.
Flint corrected her.
I'm going to change it. We're staying here.
Rhona's reply sounded more certain than she was. She took a few more steps away down the hill. She needed to figure out how to be useful and gain the tactical advantage.
Maybe I could put together a strike. Training like I've got could be an advantage to these backwoods people. We can take the witch out.
She was done discussing it, but Flint wasn't. And he caught up with her, eager to use a reasonable voice.
Rhona, you don't realize there are no guns, no special ops, strike teams, no Navy SEALs to call in for backup when you get in too deep. If you get involved in this, you have little hope of surviving it. God isn't even here to help. It's called the Dark Ages for a reason, Rhona.
Flint's hands were flying about as he talked.
God or not, I'm going to get involved. You know what? I'm tired of that mentality, that you can't change fate or whatever it is you passive people believe. If all Christians are like you, gotta be sure to win before you'll fight. Well, you can keep your religion. And it's not hopeless until the fight's over. I'm not gonna die here.
And what was life if not one grand fight? She turned and left him alone on the hill. Flint stood confounded, his thoughts even silent, for at least a few seconds. Rhona had made some good points.
Dad, Mom, I wish I could ask you about this. What's the right thing to do?
Flint's thoughts came into sharp focus. His dad had already answered his question with his life. Rhona's forceful argument about hypocrites and practicing what he preached made guilt burn more painfully in Flint.
I'm not like you, Dad. I'll never be like you. Why did you leave me?
You've been listening to episode 13 of 1232, produced by RumbleStump Entertainment. Written by Callie Sioux and Cheyenne Belle. Narrated by Callie Sioux. Today's voice talents include Robyn Cage as Rhona Thatcher, Sherry Evans as Karn, Corey Keller as Flint Thatcher, and Kaylin Landry as Daffith. This episode was mixed and engineered by Jet Black, with sound design and editing by Casey Caballero Sounds. Music by Callie Sioux and Jet Black. Featuring Fabian Zeichmaster on the Irish whistle and Jeff Spirko on strings. Mastered by Zach Bryant, 9 Moon Mastering. Cover art by Niall C. Grant. This episode was made possible by our generous and incredible supporters through Kickstarter and Patreon. To our knights, our bards, our Welsh bowmen, wizards and chieftains, thank you. Continue the adventure in episode 14.